I was once a man, but I reincarnated as the magic sword Gruhorn to guide heroes for centuries. After serving countless masters, I eventually met a man from a nameless village who would become my greatest friend. His name was Leonberger, and together we carved a path through armies of monsters that threatened the entire continent. We roamed the world as one, my blade never dulling as long as his resolve remained unshaken. Leonberger achieved feats no other human could dream of, but our greatest challenge awaited us in the frozen north. The Frost Mountains were home to a nightmare, a creature of pure destruction that few dared to even name. Lightning and snow collided as we engaged in a battle that would determine the fate of the entire kingdom. Leonberger coughed up blood, his body reaching its absolute limit. But he refused to let go of my hilt. The white dragon let out a deafening roar, preparing a breath attack that would incinerate everything in its path. Crouched and battered, Leonberger knew this was the final moment to either claim victory or meet his end. I pulsed with mana, responding to his desperate will as blue flames erupted from my holy steel blade. He grinned through the grime and shouted, "Let's go, my good friend!" before launching his final desperate assault. A massive explosion of energy rocked the mountainside, blinding the dragon with the sheer power of our bond. Leonberger leaped through the air, his movements a blur of silver and blue as he closed the distance. Just when the beast thought it had won, we struck with a force that defied the laws of nature. With one final perfect swing, we successfully defeated the white dragon of the Frost Mountains and saved the realm. My friend eventually became the ruler of a great nation, while I was enshrined as their most sacred treasure. Before passing, Leonberger begged me to look after his descendants, and I was passed down through his bloodline. Hundreds of years later, I finally wake up to a loud commotion that echoes through the royal halls. I am suddenly grabbed by an arrogant rascal who starts swinging me around like a common kitchen knife. A guard desperately pleads for the prince to return me to my rightful place before he hurts someone. I can't believe this pig is the one holding me, shouting that he can touch whatever he wants. Disgusted, I activate my authority, insight, to see exactly what kind of trash has inherited my friend's legacy. The status window confirms he is indeed a Leonberger, but the traits listed make me want to vomit. Adrian Leonberger is a lazy, lecherous fool who believes my power belongs to him by divine right. He grinds his teeth, claiming that once he masters me, no one will ever look down on him again. The brat screams, "Oh Gruhorn, lend me your power!" while lunging at the very people he should protect. Guards and maids scream in terror as Adrian goes on a mindless rampage throughout the sacred palace. He threatens to eliminate everyone like trash, completely unaware that I am the one truly in control. As the prince stumbles forward, I realize it's time to teach this pathetic descendant what it means to be a hero. The knights cry out in total panic as Prince Adrian lies motionless on the floor, soaked in his own blood. They desperately call for a royal physician, unaware that the soul inside the prince is struggling to stay conscious. I realize that even as a legendary magic sword, this weak human body has reached its absolute physical limit. At this rate, I might faint for the first time in my life as a sword as the darkness takes me. Before this, everyone knew Adrian as an incompetent glutton whose greed and arrogance were unmatched in the entire kingdom. He was a violent shadow over the throne, but strange rumors began to spread once he miraculously woke up. The maids whisper that he has stopped throwing tables, wondering if the prince has finally learned what shame feels like. But as the man currently occupying the prince's body, I couldn't care less about what the servants are gossiping about. I feel a twinge of guilt for stealing the body of my old friend's descendant, despite the boy's terrible reputation. A panicked maid rushes in to announce that the king is finally coming to visit his recovering son, for once. A stern knight enters first, mocking me for still having a rotten temperament despite nearly dying from a sword wound. I stare back blankly, wondering who this man is, while he demands to know if I am just pretending. I wonder if this man was the original prince's master, since I cannot recall any memories of their past relationship. Just as I claim my memory is a mess, the announcement rings out that the king has finally arrived. Seeing the king's presence, I am immediately impressed, noting that the man is actually much stronger than I expected. I thought the lion's blood would have thinned over generations, but seeing him, I realized the royal lineage is strong. The king sighs, assuming that even a brush with death couldn't change his son's disrespectful and silent attitude. Concerned by the report of memory loss, he orders the royal physician to perform a thorough examination immediately. The doctor finds no physical abnormalities, suggesting the amnesia might just be a temporary symptom of mental shock. The king scoffs, saying, "How convenient for you," clearly believing I am just lying to avoid consequences. He stares me down, asking if I really think saying I don't remember will erase everything I have done. The king explains that learning from mistakes is part of growth, but I have chosen a coward's way out. His anger flares as he realizes that by forgetting, I will never truly understand the weight of my past actions. The king continues to curse me, while I realize I am dealing with a very deep-seated family hatred. Forget being treated like a prince. I realize the original Adrian wasn't even considered a human being by his father. Suddenly, a soft voice calls out the name Ian, breaking the tension as a new figure enters the room. The queen smothers me in a hug, telling me I don't need to remember that cruel and painful past. She begs me never to touch a dangerous sword again, relieved that her handsome son is still alive. I feel incredibly awkward, wanting to apologize because her real son has already passed away, and I am just a sword. As the queen finally leaves me to rest, I stare into the night, feeling completely out of place in this palace. I let out a heavy sigh, feeling the crushing weight of this new life and the body I now inhabit. My good friend asked me to look after his descendants, yet the prince died at my very own blade. I will have to live his share of life properly. After centuries as a sword, I am used to cleaning up. This body is incompetent and fat, but who gives a damn? I can always rebuild my strength from scratch. To regain my power, I need to cultivate a mana heart. I begin the process, drawing energy deep into my lungs. Suddenly, the blue light flickers and fades. I stare at my hands in confusion, wondering why the energy is vanishing. The mana scattered because this body is unable to accept it. I refuse to give up and try one more time. I grit my teeth, forcing the energy to circulate, but the physical strain is becoming too much for me to handle. I collapse onto the floor, gasping for air. What kind of useless, pathetic body did I end up in? I am furious at this weakness. If I had my original sword body, I would have forced the mana into place. Just as I am wallowing in frustration, a knock at the door interrupts me. The maid has come to check in. She brings a special tonic from the queen, claiming it will be beneficial for my health. I look with suspicion. The maid is terrified, remembering how the prince used to throw bowls and scream that he would not take medicine. But as the steam rises, I notice something incredible. This isn't just medicine. There is actual mana swirling inside. I quickly snatch the bowl. The maid is stunned by my sudden change in behavior and lack of aggression. I gulp down the bitter liquid without hesitation. The maid stands there frozen, unable to believe her eyes. I slam the empty bowl down and order her to leave. Now that I have fuel, I can try again. Fortunately, the tonic is working, but the amount of mana is still far too low to complete the process today. I burst out of the room, startling the maid. I need more of that medicine if I am to succeed. I point a finger and demand, "Is there any more of that?" This tonic is the key to my restoration. A few days later, after consuming more tonics, I feel the energy surging. The air around my hand crackles. Finally, the moment has arrived. I have gathered enough mana to attempt creating the mana heart once and for all. I have done this countless times for others, but I forgot one detail. In a human body, it hurts. It feels like my chest is going to explode. I remember the warriors I raised screaming in agony during this. I realized that creating a mana heart was always supposed to be painful. I mustn't lose consciousness now. If I faint now, the mana will backflow and destroy my organs. I must stay focused, despite the searing heat. I drop to my knees, clutching my chest as the blue light bursts outward. I have to concentrate with everything. I seize the wild mass of mana, guiding it slowly along the path toward my heart. There is no error. I let the new heart soak in every drop of energy, stabilizing the core as the light begins to settle. I take a final, deep breath as the pain subsides. It is finally done. I have a mana heart. Gruhorn finally succeeds in forging a mana heart for his own body, shouting in triumph that the impossible task is finished. He celebrates his new source of power, but his joy is cut short by a strange, flickering light in his vision. A status window materializes before him, confirming the heart's creation. He's stunned, wondering why a system interface is appearing now. These messages look exactly like the ones he sent his masters as a sword. Then, the system begins restoring his original connection. Despite a poor connection, Gruhorn gains the inside authority, allowing him to see the hidden potential of anyone weaker than himself. Next, the third eye and third ear activate, heightening his senses. He wonders just how many of his old authorities are returning. Gruhorn puts his new vision to the test, finding that he can now perceive every single detail on a distant leaf. His vision is perfect, but then he hears voices from outside. The maids are wondering why he hasn't started screaming yet. Hearing the servants gossip about his past behavior is one thing, but a sudden, piercing headache brings him to his knees. The system warns that his mana is empty. Gruhorn sighs, finally understanding that extremely limited really meant only a few seconds. Gruhorn realizes the absolute senses he possessed as a magic sword have vanished, leaving him blind to his surroundings in this weak human body. He struggles to squeeze out even a drop of mana to eavesdrop, knowing he must expand his capacity to regain his former glory. Before he can master his energy, his human instincts take over, and he realizes he is starving for the first time in centuries. While servants rush to bring food, Gruhorn resolves to adapt to this fragile body, just as the queen enters the room in tears. The queen is overjoyed that her son is finally valuing his health, but Gruhorn's focus shifts to the scarred man entering the room. When asked if he remembers the warrior, Gruhorn bluntly says, no, using his memory loss to hide that he is actually an ancient sword. This man is the queen's brother, and she begs him to help his nephew, hoping the boy can finally change his disgraceful ways. The uncle scoffs that the prince's past wasn't worth remembering anyway, making it clear he has zero respect for his own kin. He warns that he will only help by trimming off the prince's excess weight, signaling a brutal training regime is about to begin. The uncle demands they harbor no wild expectations for political favors, but the queen is just relieved to have a powerful ally. Adrian looks confused, but his uncle stares him down with a gaze that demands absolute submission before their training even begins. The uncle strikes him down, declaring that Adrian needs permission just to breathe and should forget any royal treatment from now on. He mockingly offers to teach Adrian secret swordsmanship, making the legendary instructor within Adrian scoff at the sheer arrogance of the proposal. Frustrated by the constant insults about his weight, Adrian finally snaps and tells his uncle, "Let's make a bet." Adrian vows to earn his uncle's respect within 6 months, risking total obedience just to break that smug, arrogant gaze for good. If he succeeds, his uncle must grant him one wish. Amused by the boy's sudden confidence, the veteran knight simply smiles and agrees. The deal is struck for the uncle's entertainment, but Adrian privately worries that his current physical state might not live up to his words. Panting and exhausted, Adrian curses this weak, heavy body that refuses to move with the precision of the legendary blade he once was. To bridge the gap, he decides to ignite his mana, focusing every ounce of energy into burning off fat and strengthening his muscles. The sudden surge of power catches his uncle completely off guard, forcing the man to shout in disbelief as Adrian shows his true potential. Seeing the blue glow, the knight gasps in shock and asks if Adrian really managed to create a mana heart. Adrian just smirks and asks if his uncle is already regretting their bet, treating the miracle like a simple task. The knight stares in disbelief, demanding to know what the boy was thinking by using such a dangerous, outdated method. He continues to scold the prince, asking where on earth he even learned to refine a mana heart in this age. Adrian is stunned when his uncle reveals that mana hearts are now considered low-grade techniques used only by bottom-tier mercenaries. The news hits him like a physical blow, making the prince realize that the world has changed during his long slumber. His uncle reiterates that mana hearts are crude and inferior, leaving the former legendary sword feeling completely out of touch. Adrian asks what he means, so the knight says it is faster to show him and commands, Watch closely. Watching with focused eyes, Adrian notices his uncle's mana isn't a core, but instead forms into the shape of a ring. The knight explains that mana chains are more stable and specifically designed to shatter the energy of a mana heart. He notes that even the great Eli family fell into ruin a century ago because they stubbornly stuck to mana hearts. Modern theory dictates that mages use circles, while knights weave chains, with power measured by the number of rings possessed. After studying the manual, Adrian admits the theory isn't complete garbage, even if it lacks the raw power he remembers. He pauses when he sees the name Altringen on the cover, a name that triggers a distant memory of a rival. Hundreds of years ago, a man once approached the legendary sword Gruhorn, asking if he was the famous sword saint. That man was Ernest Altringen, a warrior who sought to prove his worth by challenging the greatest blade in existence. Adrian realizes these modern mana chains are actually the strange arts Ernest developed when he couldn't master traditional swordsmanship. Returning to the training grounds, the prince prepares to show his uncle that ancient techniques are still superior to modern imitations. The uncle approaches, asking if the prince finally understands how foolish his choice was after reading the basic theory book. Adrian just smiles and confidently states that he doesn't feel like he made a mistake in the slightest. Annoyed by the prince's arrogance, the uncle asks if he truly understands the gap between a heart and a chain. Adrian ignites his mana, mocking his uncle by asking if he's ever heard the phrase, difference in class, before. The knight warns that mercenaries who delude themselves into thinking they are ancient heroes always meet a tragic end. He explains that those fools always fall away, unable to surpass even 2 rings of mana with their crude methods. If Adrian wants his uncle as a guardian, he must first prove himself by defeating a double-chain knight. Adrian laughs at the challenge, openly questioning whether having his uncle as a guardian is even a good thing. The knight's temper finally flares as he asks if the prince is actually questioning his qualifications to lead. He begins listing his titles, including Commander of the Northern Army and Master of the Elite Black Lancers. A massive surge of energy erupts from the knight, intending to crush Adrian's arrogance with overwhelming high-level mana pressure. Revealing his true rank, Vale Battle-hardened shows he is a quad-chain knight who stands at the top of the kingdom. Adrian asks if this is sufficient qualification, refusing to buckle under the knight's overwhelming mana pressure. The tension finally snaps when a guard intervenes, ordering Count Battle-hardened to stand down immediately. Battle-hardened smirks with interest, realizing the prince has far more grit than the rumors ever suggested. The challenge is set, and Adrian knows he cannot go back on his word now. A short while later, the prince collapses, his body completely drained from the intense mana training. Battle-hardened ends the session for today, leaving the prince panting and broken on the cold floor. Adrian gasps that he nearly died, yet he refuses to let this agony be for nothing. The count mocks him, saying he would be lucky to beat even a single chain knight. Back at his room, the royal physician is waiting to treat the prince's many fresh injuries. The queen ordered healing magic, but the sight of the glowing mana makes Adrian panic. He kicks the doctor out, shouting that he doesn't need help because he won't waste his effort. His knight watches in silence, confused why the prince would choose to remain in such pain. Suddenly, the third Prince Gillian barges in, looking for his brother with a smug, arrogant grin. Adrian continues eating his dinner, wondering what this annoying pest wants from him now. Gillian mocks his recovery, saying it is a shame Adrian looks better than the rumors suggested. Tired of the posturing, Adrian asks if he just came here to pick a fight like a fool. Gillian reveals he heard about the bet to duel a high-ranking double-chain knight. He leans in close with a sinister smile, asking how Adrian would like him as an opponent. After Gillian leaves, Adrian wonders why every descendant of the Leonberger family is so insane. His knight explains that Prince Gillian is a genius who reached double chain at just 14. Adrian is unimpressed, but their conversation is interrupted by a maid carrying a massive tray. She apologizes for the intrusion, but reveals a mountain of letters has arrived for the prince. Adrian is baffled, wondering why people who ignored him are suddenly sending so much mail. He begins sorting through the stack, realizing these are not fan letters or royal invitations. Every single letter is a duel request from nobles wanting a legal chance to thrash him. Seeing himself labeled an easy target, Adrian's expression turns into a dark, predatory smile. He tells the maid to write down every single name of the people who challenged him. Later, a wooden sword clatters at his feet, signaling the start of another brutal training session. Balorhard demands he learn the basics so he cannot make excuses when he inevitably loses. Adrian picks it up, complaining about the Count's terrible personality while preparing for the next strike. Adrian screams in agony as his muscles tear, but Balorhard stops him with a surprising question about healing magic. The Count explains that magic only restores muscles to their original state, which prevents them from actually growing stronger. Adrian goes quiet, realizing he has to endure the pain if he ever wants to build a real knight's body. Balorhard decides to show him the kingdom's foundational technique, warning the prince to watch closely because he'll only show it once. He calls it the training sword, a basic style meant to build a foundation for every knight in the kingdom. Suddenly, the air shifts as the Count prepares to move, his eyes turning cold and sharp. In a blur of motion, Balorhard unleashes a series of strikes that leave the air whistling in his wake. Every movement is precise and overwhelming, far exceeding what a basic training style should look like. He brings the blade down with a thunderous impact, demonstrating the true power hidden within the fundamentals. The courtyard falls silent as the dust settles, leaving the prince completely speechless at the display. Adrian gasps, asking if that incredible display was really just the basic style taught to every trainee. Balorhard scoffs, saying it lacks sharpness but remains the best way to master the basics of the sword. He adds a stinging insult, claiming that considering Adrian's lack of talent, even this might be too much for him. Instead of getting angry, Adrian bursts into laughter, his mind racing with a realization the Count couldn't possibly know. He recognizes this style as the Dragon Slayer, the legendary technique used to behead the mad dragon in the past. When Balorhard suggests finding a different teacher later, Adrian refuses, insisting that this style alone is more than enough. The Count is baffled by the prince's sudden confidence, but simply tells him to do as he pleases. Adrian grips his wooden sword, feeling the weight of the legacy he is about to reclaim through sheer effort. He can't believe the current Dragon Slayer style has been reduced to a trivial training exercise for beginners. He realizes the style lost its power because modern knights lack the will required to actually slay dragons. Those who forgot how to imbue their swords with will could never recognize the true value of this technique. Balorhard interrupts his thoughts, easily parrying Adrian's swing and reminding him that tension isn't the same as power. He instructs the prince to focus his strength in his belly and legs, rather than just his arms. Adrian collapses from exhaustion, but the Count's words about channeling strength through the whole body stick with him. He knows his current body is just a weak vessel, clumsily mimicking what people call a fake style. Determined, Adrian vows to prove that the Dragon Slayer style isn't just old junk to be thrown away. Days turn into a week of grueling training, with Adrian running and swinging until his bones ache constantly. Even at night, he focuses on his mana, pushing through the fatigue to reshape his sluggish constitution. After a full month of hellish effort, a system message confirms his morbid obesity has finally shifted to general obesity. His clumsy trait disappears as Adrian stands tall, his body finally becoming a weapon worthy of the sword. Gruhorn's constant training finally pays off as his new body's constitution shifts, allowing him to accumulate massive amounts of mana. His debilitating mana disorder finally vanishes, replaced by a heightened sensitivity that lets him feel every vibration of the blade. He swings with a fluidity he lacked just weeks ago, ignoring the desperate shouts for him to stop his relentless practice. Every strike is more perfect than the last, driven by a soul that has already mastered the apex of swordsmanship. "Did you not hear me tell you to stop?" a voice bellows, finally breaking his trance as wood splinters everywhere. Gruhorn stands amidst a pile of shattered training swords, his wooden blade finally snapping under the pressure of his raw power. Standing in the pouring rain, he realizes his hands are bleeding, but the knights watching are even more shocked by his progress. He looks up to see the scarred knight and weakly asks, "Uncle, while blood drips from his mangled, overworked grip. Despite the pain, he watches the training dummy crumble, electrified by the remnants of the mana he just unleashed. The target is reduced to smoking splinters, proving that the rogue prince is no longer a failure, but a legend reborn. The instructor screams at the prince for training in the storm, shouting that he would be dead if that were a real blade. His hands are battered, but the system announces he has unlocked hyperfocus after reaching a state of extreme, life-threatening concentration. Gruhorn chuckles as he fades, thinking that if he focuses like that again, his heart might just stop from the strain. The prince finally collapses from exhaustion, forcing the panicked knight to catch him before he hits the cold, wet stone. Looking down at the unconscious boy, the knight can only sigh and call him a foolish brat for his reckless dedication. The prince eventually wakes in his own bed, disoriented and wondering if he really lost consciousness from such a brief session. He clutches his head, realizing he ignored the limits of this weak body because he was used to being an indestructible sword. Before this, he spent centuries as a blade, raising nameless war heroes, legendary swordmasters, and even the founders of great kingdoms. He led countless warriors to victory, guiding the path of heroes and elevating their souls through the heat of every battle. This was the legend of Gruhorn, the wise advisor who has now traded his steel form for the life of a prince. Gruhorn remembers his past as a sword, a mere third party that watched others achieve greatness, while he remained a tool. To change that, he pushed this prince's body to the limit, realizing he must balance his mind to prevent breaking. A month has passed since he formed his mana heart, and he is finally ready to progress to the next stage. His relentless training pays off as the system confirms he has successfully gathered enough mana to trigger a breakthrough. Energy surges through his core, beginning the painful process of refining a body that was once fragile and weak. Notifications chime as his mana heart expands, allowing the prince to finally withstand the true pressure of his own power. With his physical constitution completely transformed by the mana, Gruhorn opens his eyes and feels the surge of new strength. "It is done," he declares, standing up with a newfound aura before reaching for the sword to test his progress. The moment he grips the hilt, the system promotes him to Sword Learner, granting him access to basic aura manipulation. Seeing his reflection in the glowing steel, Gruhorn smiles, confident that he can finally handle the basics of this world. Rumors of Adrian's sudden change are spreading like wildfire throughout the kingdom, reaching even the highest ranks of the military. Lord battle-hardened is clearly annoyed by the noise, demanding that his nephew stop stalling and finally pick a duel opponent. Adrian already has someone in mind, but he knows facing a double-chain knight right now would be suicide. He suggests warming up with some single-chain beginners first, a request his uncle is more than happy to grant. Karl presents the organized list of challengers, confirming that many nobles are eager to put the prince in his place. However, Karl warns that these men aren't looking for a fair match. They intend to use the duel to kill him. Adrian is fully aware of the danger, which is exactly why he needs the strongest man present to watch his back. With a confident smirk, the prince reveals his true intention for inviting his powerful uncle to the training grounds. "Just stop anyone from dying during the duel," Adrian says, making it clear he plans to be the one doing the hitting. A few days later, the morning of the first duel arrives, and the atmosphere at the palace is thick with tension. Standing before the first prince's palace, a young man trembles with a mixture of fear and deep-seated resentment. Taylor Talheim, the son of a minor baron, has spent years waiting for this chance to reclaim his family's lost pride. Years ago, the original prince publicly humiliated Taylor's family at a royal banquet, laughing as he called them country bumpkins. That single moment of cruelty turned the Talheims into a laughingstock, leaving a scar on their honor that never healed. "I will make you pay dearly for that day," Taylor mutters, finally facing the man who ruined his father's life. Taylor introduces himself with strict knightly etiquette, desperate to show he is a true practitioner of his family's swordsmanship. Adrian just yawns, wondering why this weakling is being so formal for what he considers a mere warm-up session. Lord battle-hardened steps in to stop the bickering, ordering Taylor to calm his murderous spirit before the match even begins. The young knight is immediately starstruck, bowing low to the legendary hero, while completely ignoring the prince he's supposed to fight. Adrian grumbles about his uncle stealing the spotlight, but Balorhart reminds him that respect is earned through behavior, not birthright. With both fighters finally in position, the commander signals the start of the duel that the entire palace is watching. Taylor immediately ignites his mana, his blade glowing with the power of a single-chain apprentice knight. "Please be careful," Taylor shouts, launching a lethal strike intended to end the match before the prince can even react. He pours every ounce of his hatred into the attack, convinced that the spoiled prince won't be able to defend himself. Adrian watches the blade approach with boredom, noting that Taylor's form is cluttered with far too many useless movements. Taylor's eyes widen in horror as his mana-infused strike is stopped cold by a simple, unadorned sword. The force of the parry sends Taylor reeling back, his feet scraping against the stone as he struggles to stay upright. He can't understand how a mere mana heart could block a chain, but Adrian just smiles and calls it tingly. Suddenly, a high-pitched vibration rings out from Adrian's blade, causing the surrounding knights to gasp in collective shock. Lord Balorhard's jaw drops as he recognizes the sound of sword resonance, a feat impossible for a mere beginner. The noble charges Zion in a panic, screaming, "It can't be!" as he realizes the supposed rogue prince is actually fighting back. Their blades collide with a violent spark, forcing a pained grunt from Zion as he struggles to hold back the heavy strike. Driven by desperation, the opponent screams, "Ah!" while unleashing a flurry of rapid-fire attacks to finally crush Zion's defenses. A massive explosion of mana erupts from the clash, sending Zion skidding backward as he fights to keep his footing. Zion realizes the warnings about ring and heart mana being incompatible were true, as his internal energy begins to fracture painfully. Though a fatal mana backflow could happen at any second, Zion smirks, determined to push this 15-year-old body past its limits. He stares at the exhausted noble, mockingly asking if he is really Baron Talheim's son, before preparing to end the duel. Zion tells him to cool your head a bit, and closes his eyes, seeking a moment of absolute calm amidst the chaos. He plunges into a deep meditative state, focusing every sense on harmonizing the conflicting mana currents swirling inside his heart. Deep within his subconscious, Zion commands his power to awaken, finally merging his ancient soul with the prince's untapped potential. Gruhorn reflects on his past lives as a legendary blade, realizing every holy sword was just a fragment of his soul. The prince's mana heart begins to shift, forced to change color as it finally accepts Gruhorn's colossal and ancient will. This triggers the will to slay dragons, an old memory from the sword's recent activity that refuses to stay dormant. As the Dragon Slayer heart activates, the prince's body is flooded with an essence designed to kill the world's strongest beasts. This is the true power of the dragon-slaying sword, a force forged specifically to bring the most powerful dragons down. The heart's energy merges with the blade, creating a demonic pressure that signals the end for anyone standing in his way. His opponent trembles in pure terror, whispering, "Just what in the world is—" as he realizes he's no longer fighting a human. Sensing the lethal intent, the uncle screams, "Stop!" But he is already too late to prevent the prince from unleashing his power. Gruhorn lunges forward with a murderous gaze, proving that this sword is far too dangerous for a simple training exercise. It all started when the prince asked for one favor before the spar, hiding his true nature behind a deceptive smile. Sanders warns that if his power spirals out of control during the duel, there is only one way to prevent a total disaster. The prince lunges forward with a murderous intent that feels all too real, forcing the veteran knight to make a split-second decision. Count Balorhard intervenes with a surge of blue energy, fulfilling Sanders' request for his uncle to stop him by any means necessary. A violent explosion of mana erupts as the Count strikes with enough force to neutralize the prince's runaway energy and shatter the stone. The dust settles to reveal Sanders slumped against a wall, completely drained after being overwhelmed by the Count's superior strength. Horrified guards immediately surround Balorhard with drawn blades, shouting, "Count Balorhard, what have you done?" as they suspect treasonous regicide. Sanders weakly orders the knights to stand back, taking full responsibility by admitting, I asked him to do it, to protect his uncle. Though he planned this test, Sanders mutters that he never expected to be knocked out cold before his vision finally fades into darkness. Panicked cries of, "Your Highness!" echo through the courtyard as the prince collapses, leaving the witnesses in a state of absolute terror. Waking up later, Sanders clutches his chest, realizing his mana heart nearly cracked from the sheer intensity of the Count's powerful strike. Sanders realizes his uncle's power is on another level after taking a direct hit, relieved that his body suffered no lasting side effects. Despite the lingering pain, the prince cannot help but grin, knowing that against all odds, he actually won the duel. The Count suddenly barges in, demanding to know what Sanders did to achieve such a strange and overwhelming victory in their clash. He yells that he never taught Sanders such an unrighteous sword style, visibly shaken by the dark aura he witnessed during the fight. Sanders calmly replies that he was simply being faithful to the sword's essence, refusing to back down from his uncle's intense gaze. The Count argues that while killing intent is the sword's essence, the prince's version is flagrant, uncomfortable, and far too dangerous. To the prince's surprise, the Count admits this brutal style is also a truth, acknowledging the effectiveness of his nephew's lethal methods. Instead of a lecture on righteousness, the Count reveals he is a soldier who prioritizes victory over the hollow path of chivalry. However, he warns that excessive killing intent will eventually blind Sanders, making it impossible to tell his friends from his enemies. The Count vows to watch Sanders closely, determined to see if the young prince will be consumed by his own inner demons. After 3 grueling days of practice duels, Sanders finally lowers his blade to address the exhausted knight, Taylor Tailheim. He praises Taylor for surviving, knowing how difficult it was to block a sword fueled by uncontrolled and pure killing intent. Sanders teases that it is a shame Taylor couldn't land a single hit, though the knight is clearly just glad to be alive. The prince orders a maid to bring a heavy wooden chest forward, piquing the curiosity of everyone present in the courtyard. Recalling the terrible things the original prince did to Taylor's family, Sanders hopes this gesture can finally begin to make amends. He hands over gold and a letter for Baron Tailheim, telling Taylor to travel safely and return home with his head high. Though he feels no obligation to fix the previous scoundrel's messes, Sanders believes that anyone who works this hard deserves fair pay. Meanwhile, the palace gossips are convinced the prince's arrogance has finally dug his grave, eagerly waiting for news of his humiliation. But as days pass without any scandal, the people are confused when they corner Taylor to ask how the duel actually went. Surprisingly, Taylor and the other knights defend Sanders, claiming the rumors were wrong, and the prince fought with true sincerity. Skeptical nobles immediately assume the royal family must have silenced the witnesses to protect the first prince's failing reputation. Hearing this, Sanders slams his fist in rage, shouting that Taylor is only staying quiet because he is embarrassed he lost. He complains that these nobles have too much free time, only for the Count to smirk and say he is one to talk. Sanders grabs his subordinate, demanding that he spread the real results of the duel to kill the silencing rumors once and for all. The prince waits for the gossip to finally die down, confident that his plan to clear his name is working perfectly. Instead, a maid reports a new rumor, claiming Sanders threatened to kill the knights unless they fabricated the results of the match. Realizing he cannot win against the court's imagination, Sanders decides to forget the drama and focus entirely on his training. He pours his frustration into his blade, swinging with such intensity that the air itself begins to scream around him. Every strike is a release of pent-up mana as Sanders pushes his physical limits to master the overwhelming power inside him. Surrounded by a swirling aura of blue flames, the prince settles into a deep focus, preparing for the true battles ahead. Carl confirms today's duel is the final one, while Sanders sighs that apprentice knights no longer provide a challenge. The last opponent isn't a mere student, but a talented knight who has mastered her family's unique sword arts. Sanders smirks when he sees the name Arwen Kergayan, a probation knight from the prestigious Iron Lion Knights. As Arwen enters the arena, her presence commands respect, marking her as the most dangerous opponent he has faced. Known as the Thorny Rose, her reputation as a cold beauty precedes her, and the guards are certain of her identity. She is famously known as the woman who broke the hearts of every man who dared to approach her. The palace guards whisper in awe, shocked that the prince managed to lure such a legendary woman to a duel. Arwen remains silent, her eyes focused only on the match as she prepares to settle an old score. The onlookers mockingly hope that the prince gets humiliated by her, eager to see him finally meet his match. As a member of the kingdom's top order, Arwen is a genius, whose official membership is already guaranteed by her skill. Sanders wonders why a genius would seek him out, but Carl cryptically mentions a past misunderstanding between them. Sensing a dark secret, Sanders corners a maid and demands to know what his previous self actually did to Arwen. The maid trembles as she reveals the truth, admitting the prince had relentlessly harassed Arwen in the past. Sanders clutches his head in shame, cursing the original owner of his body for being such a pathetic, crazy bastard. In a shameful flashback, the former prince tried to force Arwen into becoming his personal maid because of her beauty. Arwen had stood her ground, coldly reminding the spoiled royal that knights were not his private property. Enraged by her rejection, the prince had thrown a tantrum, calling her ugly in front of the entire court. Sanders realizes that his predecessor's twisted courtship was nothing more than the behavior of a rotten scoundrel. Looking at her now, he knows calling her ugly was a blatant lie, as her beauty is undeniable to anyone. Arwen greets him coldly, noting that he hasn't changed at all, unaware that the soul inside is completely different. Feeling the weight of the previous prince's sins, Sanders sighs, accepting that this duel is his inevitable karma. Count Balorhard arrives to oversee the match, his presence adding even more pressure to the upcoming confrontation. The Count warns Arwen to be careful, calling the prince's sword vicious, much to Sanders' annoyance. With the observer in place, both fighters take their positions, the air thick with tension and unspoken resentment. The duel officially begins, and Arwen immediately drops into a low stance, ready to strike with lethal precision. Sanders wants to test the Iron Lion's skill, but he is nearly blindsided by her explosive speed. He barely blocks her first strike, acknowledging that her movements are far beyond anything he has faced so far. Suddenly, Sanders feels his mana beginning to backflow, a dangerous sign that his body is reaching its limit. Arwen doesn't give him a moment to breathe, unleashing a relentless flurry of strikes that pushes him back. Realizing he is being completely dragged around by her pace, Sanders knows he must change tactics before he loses. To counter Arwen's pressure, Sanders activates the Dragon Slayer's heart, flooding his body with a massive surge of power. The sudden shift in energy catches Arwen off guard, forcing her to brace against his explosive red aura. She tries to regain her footing, but Sanders is already closing the gap with terrifying newfound speed. Sanders acknowledges her skill, thinking she is definitely on a different level compared to the usual riffraff he fights. He uses his authority of judgment to peek at Arwen's stats, realizing she possesses the rare Sword Prodigy trait. Seeing her status proves she is not overwhelmingly stronger than him, giving Sanders the opening he needs to win. This realization fuels Sanders' determination to push past his physical limits and finally claim victory over the talented knight. The real fight starts now, Sanders shouts as he lunges forward to finally turn the tide of the battle. Their blades collide with such intensity that the shockwave echoes throughout the entire training grounds, shaking the very air. As the sun sets, both fighters are gasping for air, their bodies battered from the relentless, high-speed exchange. The commander finally steps in to stop the match, declaring they will continue the duel tomorrow morning instead. Sanders clicks his tongue in annoyance, claiming he was just about to finish the fight right then and there. Arwen matches his arrogance, replying that she was also just one move away from claiming a total victory. The commander insists it is too late, ordering both of them to seek immediate medical treatment for their wounds. While the healers tend to his bruises, Sanders can't help but glare at his formidable opponent with burning intensity. Arwen turns away without a word, her pride clearly stung by the fact she couldn't defeat the first prince. As she walks off, she vows to herself that she absolutely will not lose to him in tomorrow's round. By the third day, the spectating knights are shocked that the prince's skills are equally as impressive as Arwen's. Before they cross blades again, Sanders stops Arwen, telling her he has something important to say before they begin. Arwen looks at him with contempt, asking if he is finally going to apologize for his earlier rude behavior. She makes it clear she has no intention of accepting an apology, wanting to settle their score with steel. Sanders just laughs it off, telling her that an apology was actually the last thing on his mind. He proposes a bet where the loser grants the winner one wish, even if they are told to kneel. The suggestion leaves Arwen speechless, her mind racing at the audacity of such a reckless and bold wager. The other knights are outraged, demanding the prince withdraw his statement to protect the royal family's dignity immediately. Ignoring the noise, Sanders looks Arwen in the eye and asks what her final decision will be regarding the bet. Arwen agrees, deciding that if the prince permits it, she is entitled to receive the prize of the bet. No going back on your word later, Sanders warns, as they both prepare for their final, most intense clash. The duel resumes with a ferocity that dwarfs their previous fights, each strike carrying the weight of their wish. Sanders lets out a dark smile before unleashing a crushing strike that leaves Arwen completely overwhelmed and reeling. Arwen is stunned by the prince's sudden increase in speed, wondering if he was hiding his true strength. Sanders doesn't give her a moment to breathe, unleashing a series of strikes that push her back. She grunts as the pressure builds, her defense crumbling under the weight of his relentless and precise attacks. Gasping for air, Arwen realizes she is completely outmatched by the man everyone called a lazy scoundrel. Sanders sees his chance and drives forward, his blade glowing with the intensity of his winning intent. A violent clash rings out across the courtyard, signaling the final moment of their intense, high-stakes duel. Arwen's sword is sent spinning away, and she falls to her knees, defeated in front of everyone. The commander and the other knights watch in disbelief, unable to process the prince's sudden martial prowess. As Arwen stares in shock at her empty hands, Sanders reminds her that he won their bet. With a sharp gaze, the prince repeats his demand, "I want you," leaving Arwen completely frozen in place. One of the guards recalls his early days, thinking his job protecting the notorious prince would be easy. He quickly learned that the prince was arrogant, but he lacked the violent tantrums mentioned in rumors. Instead, the guard discovered a side of his highness that no one else in the kingdom knew. Even in the pouring rain, the prince would train alone, ignoring the concerned calls of his royal attendants. The sound of his wooden sword hitting the post echoed through the storm with a terrifyingly heavy rhythm. "Your Highness, watch out!" the guard yelled as lightning struck, yet the prince didn't even flinch. He just smiled, looking like a man possessed by a passion for the sword that bordered on insanity. The guard once believed the prince would be great, but this scandalous demand for Arwen confuses him. The other knights are horrified by the prince's words, wondering if he is finally showing his true colors. Arwen asks, with a trembling voice, if that is truly what his highness desires from an apprentice knight. Sanders scoffs, telling her that she is currently just an ordinary knight who can't even defeat him. He clarifies that he wants her future and potential, needing a knight who will follow him personally. He doesn't want a guard assigned by a royal decree, but a warrior who belongs solely to him. Sanders looks at her hidden status screen, seeing her sword prodigy trait and her immense hidden talent. "Become my knight," he commands, offering her a destiny far beyond what the Royal Academy could provide. Arwen thinks back to her past, remembering the struggle of being a female apprentice in a man's world. While others only commented on her striking appearance, she was focused on mastering the art of the blade. She pushed herself twice as hard as anyone else, determined to prove that she wasn't just a pretty face. One by one, she defeated every fellow apprentice, proving her skill through countless duels in the training hall. She was always the winner, yet no one ever acknowledged the true depth of her ambition, until now. Arwen dominates her opponents with ease, yet the crowd refuses to see her as anything more than a pretty face. They mockingly call her the poster girl, making Arwen realize she will never be respected as a true knight here. She looks at Adrian, wondering if this prince is the only one who sees her true potential and future path. Arwen makes a final request, asking Adrian to treat her not as a woman, but strictly as a fellow knight. If he can promise that, she will dedicate herself to his cause and follow his highness wherever he leads. Adrian gives his word without hesitation, prompting Arwen to step forward and finalize her decision before the entire academy. Kneeling in the dirt, Arwen officially swears her eternal loyalty to Prince Adrian Leonberger, stunning the watching crowd of students. She offers her sword and her life to his service, while Carl watches the scene with a look of disbelief. In the name of the royal family, Adrian draws his blade to officially dub her a knight of the realm. Be brave, be courteous, and be loyal, he commands, as the sun sets on her new life as his subordinate. Arwen begins her training with renewed vigor, but the news of her oath sends shockwaves through the rest of the school. The other apprentices call it a disgrace, claiming an oath made on a bet should be nullified immediately by the staff. Disgusting rumors spread that Arwen is merely a mistress hiding behind a knight's title to cover up a secret relationship. Hearing the gossip, Adrian is furious that the world still views him as nothing but the worst scum on earth. Carl approaches the irritated prince, recalling their previous conversation about the true meaning of a knight's personal loyalty. He asks about the day of the final duel, curious if Adrian still stands by his harsh words about royal decrees. Adrian explains that a knight, forced by a king's order, would abandon him the moment the decree was officially changed. When Adrian suggests Carl could swear an oath later, the knight asks if the prince would even bother accepting him. "No, I don't want you," Adrian replies bluntly, stating there is no joy in raising someone as talented as Carl. Carl laughs it off as a joke, but Adrian's cold expression proves he is completely serious about his picky standards. The mood shifts when a royal notice arrives, announcing that Adrian's probation has been lifted a month and a half early. Adrian is suspicious, wondering why the king would release him after trying to lock him away in the palace forever. He tells his maid he doesn't care about his freedom, since he has no friends and nowhere else to go. That is when she presents a mysterious invitation that just arrived for the prince, catching him completely by surprise. The letter bears an expensive crest, inviting him to a social club specifically for the kingdom's most special young lords. Adrian reads the title with confusion, having no memory of being part of such an exclusive group in this body. His maid's nervous reaction confirms his suspicion that this social gathering might actually be a very weird and dangerous place. It turns out the club was just a den for drinking and chasing women, fitting the old Adrian's degenerate reputation. He intends to decline until he sees the sender is Bernardo of the Eli family, a name from the past. The Eli name belonged to a family that fell to ruin a century ago, making Adrian wonder who sent this. The time for idle reflection is over, as Adrian prepares to step back into the world of high society. He decides to attend the meeting, hoping the Eli family hasn't completely fallen from grace in his long absence. 4 months of intense training have passed since he took over the body of the scoundrel first prince. The tailor is delighted, having followed every instruction for a simple black design with absolutely minimal embellishments. Looking in the mirror, Adrian notes he's lost significant weight, with his measurements decreasing by more than half. He leaves the banquet outfit to the tailor's discretion, but warns him to wait a little longer before starting. Adrian knows his body is still rapidly changing through training, saying, "My measurements will change again by then," with a smirk. With his probation finally lifted, Adrian heads toward the social club, escorted by a unit of elite royal guards. Despite the luxury, he finds the carriage and the constant supervision of the guards to be frustratingly stifling. His boredom is interrupted when he notices something peculiar about the maid sitting quietly across from him. He asks about the visible scar on her neck, but she shamefully claims it resulted from her own incompetence. Adrian realizes the previous owner of this body was even more of a monster than he initially imagined. Realizing he doesn't even know her name, he asks, and she reveals she is Adelia Bayern. The name Bayern sends a shock through his mind, as it is a name that barely exists in modern nobility. He recalls an era before kingdoms existed, when humans were nothing more than prey for the continent's monsters. That miserable history ended because of the saviors who allowed humanity to finally become the dominant species. These legendary heroes were known as the Five Electors, and one of them stands out in his memory. He remembers a warrior standing atop a mountain of corpses, asking Gruhorn what they would do after the war. In the past, he saw her charge into a sea of giants without a single trace of fear. With a single decisive strike, she changed the fate of the world forever by slaying the king of giants. This was the hero who beheaded Ida and ended the era of exploitation that had plagued humanity for centuries. Her name was Agnes Bayern, the legendary iron-blooded sword marquis who once commanded the respect of all. But Gruhorn remembers her for more than just strength. She had a tongue sharper than any steel blade. She would scream at the giants, calling them bastards who only thought about filling their disgusting, gluttonous stomachs. Her insults were legendary, mocking their massive bodies and claiming they acted like the mindless beasts they were. Even now, just remembering her foul-mouthed rants makes Adrian feel like his ears are getting dirty from the memory. He stares at the timid maid, wondering how a descendant of that legendary warrior ended up in such a state. The carriage comes to a halt as the guard announces they have finally arrived at their destination. Adrian steps out, realizing the timing is perfect to start making his move among the high-ranking noble children. He tells a confused Adelia they will talk later, leaving her wondering why the prince is suddenly interested in her. Bernardo of the Eli family greets Prince Adrian with a bow, asking if His Highness has been well all this time. Bernardo is relieved to see him safe, but Adrian secretly dismisses the noble as nothing more than a puny punk. Adrian lets out a sharp laugh, a dangerous smirk crossing his face as he realizes how he can use this gathering. Bernardo asks if the prince is still feeling unwell, but Adrian simply replies that he is glad he decided to come. Patting Bernardo's shoulder, Adrian promises that today will be very entertaining, leaving the noble confused by the prince's sudden shift. They enter a lounge where rowdy nobles share vulgar stories of their conquests, the atmosphere thick with drunken laughter. While the other lords flirt and drink themselves into a stupor, Adrian sits silently, a sharp contrast to the debauchery. Bernardo finds it strange, noting that normally the prince would be dead drunk and flirting with every woman in sight. He realizes Adrian's aura has completely changed, watching as the prince calmly observes the room instead of joining the chaos. A drunk noble approaches, mentioning the rumors that Adrian plucked the flower of the Iron Lion, as the gossip spreads fast. The first prince grips the noble's collar, warning that while he accepts being called a scoundrel, he won't be treated like one. The onlookers are completely baffled by his strange words, but the prince is about to show them exactly what he means. With a brutal punch, the prince declares the man needs to be hit more, sending the noble crashing across the floor. Silence falls over the room as the noble lies unconscious, leaving the witnesses terrified of the prince's sudden, violent change. Grinning with blood on his face, the prince tells a cowering Eli that today is turning out to be very entertaining. Eli wonders why this crazy bastard is acting so differently, before the prince commands him to summon the royal knights immediately. Terrified for his life, Eli scrambles to his feet and sprints away to fulfill the prince's unexpected and ominous order. As Eli leaves, the prince stands alone in the center of the hall, calculating his next move against the corrupt nobles. He coldly orders the women to leave the room, causing the remaining men to tremble as they realize they are trapped. When a man tries to sneak out, the prince stops him cold, reminding the coward that he only gave permission for women. The prince warns the cowards that leaving now means leaving as a woman, making his lethal intentions crystal clear. Panic spreads through the room as the nobles realize the prince is no longer a pushover they can bully. He coldly lists their crimes, from mocking his face to failing to show even a shred of royal respect. Since they dared to insult his knight, the prince turns to his guards and asks what the legal punishment is. The doors burst open as heavily armed knights arrive, leaving the corrupt noble children trembling in absolute despair. His commander declares their actions are tantamount to treason, asking the prince for the final order to strike. Standing before his loyal troops, the prince asks who among these trash should be forced to their knees first. A terrifying smirk crosses his face as he looks down at the pathetic men who once thought they were superior. With one word, the prince orders the arrest of everyone in the room, effectively purging the capital of its rot. Later, the king fumes over the arrest of 14 noble children, accusing the prince of using every possible excuse. The king worries about political backlash, but the prince already knows how to manipulate the high-ranking families. He dismisses the arrested nobles as irredeemable trash that only tarnish their families' reputations by existing. To handle the fallout, the prince suggests sending letters to the specific people who want these scoundrels gone. He plans to empower the ambitious siblings of those arrested, turning a potential revolt into a personal debt. Exhausted by his son's ruthless efficiency, the king dismisses him, allowing the prince to continue his secret recruitment. He finds a trembling maid and tells her not to be nervous, putting on a friendly face to hide his intent. Adelia weeps, terrified she has done wrong, while the prince realizes how much the nobles tormented her. Her family, the Bayerns, were once legendary, but now they are barely even considered a noble house anymore. Their history of glory was erased, and their peerless martial arts were lost to time, leaving her family in ruin. Looking into her eyes, the prince sees a spark of the pride that once defined the great Bayern warriors. He checks her status and is stunned to find S-rank swordsmanship talent hidden within this fragile, weeping girl. However, her traits are a chaotic mess of bloodlust and submission, including butcher and a slave mentality. He realizes she possesses unrivaled talent but lacks any mental traits to control the madness lurking within her. The prince hesitates, wondering if it is truly safe to unleash such a volatile weapon upon the world. Deciding that an S-rank talent is too valuable to ignore, he resolves to shape her into his ultimate blade. He spots a trait he can exploit, a slave mentality that makes her crave a master to serve. This specific trait means she will find joy and purpose in serving a master she truly respects. He looks down at Adelia and demands that she swear her eternal loyalty to him right then and there. Adelia is overwhelmed when the prince offers to make her his knight, falling to her knees in shock. He promises to take responsibility for her family if she serves him as her master, binding her fate forever. Adrian promises to control Adelia's inner madness, making her wonder if he will truly protect her family. He confirms he will bring them to the capital, and the hope in her eyes is finally restored. Adelia kneels, formally swearing her eternal loyalty to Prince Adrian Leonberger as the daughter of the Bayern family. She vows to devote her entire life to him, and Adrian simply accepts his new, most loyal servant. He demands unconditional obedience, and she agrees instantly, feeling a strange sense of relief under his hand. Despite gaining a powerful ally, Adrian looks away, questioning if dragging her into his world was right. Meanwhile, rumors spread that the prince has returned to his scoundrel ways, using dirty tricks to force loyalty. The court whispers that he is beating noble children and throwing them into prison without a second thought. They mock his choice of a maid knight, claiming he is only interested in building a personal harem. The king is furious, accusing Adrian of wasting time with women instead of fixing the chaos he caused. His brother joins in the mockery, laughing at how pathetic Adrian looks for appointing a lowly maid. Adrian is already exhausted by the gossip when he hears the queen has arrived to deal with him. He lets out a frustrated shout, knowing exactly what kind of headache his mother is about to bring. The queen believes he is relapsing into his old habits, but she sees this as the perfect opportunity. She declares that a marriage will finally settle him down and vows to find him a suitable spouse. Adrian can only stare in disbelief, completely drained by his mother's sudden plan to force him into marriage. Turning back to his new knight, Adelia asks if she will finally be able to wield mana. Adrian confirms she will receive a special type as he prepares to perform a forbidden technique. The world has forgotten the legendary sword Marquis, but Adrian remembers every detail of her ancient power. He visualizes her dance and begins channeling that forgotten strength directly into Adelia's soul. He focuses intensely on her heartbeat, sensing the spark of potential hidden deep within her body. System messages confirm the success as Adrian imprints the mana, permanently changing Adelia's soul and fate forever. A mana heart is born, and Adrian instructs her to keep practicing this secret forging method alone. Creating the heart drains Adrian completely, causing him to collapse as a panicked Adelia rushes to him. He dismisses her concern, telling her to leave, while she wonders why he would sacrifice so much. Overwhelmed by his dedication, she bows deeply and swears to serve him for the rest of her life. Adrian gives a tired smirk, reminding her to never forget that he is now her true master. Secretly, he worries that she might eventually forget the weight of the debt she owes him. A few days pass, and Adelia's devotion has transformed into a gaze that is almost frighteningly intense. A knight interrupts his rest to report that Bernardo Eli is currently being held by the royal guard. Learning Bernardo Eli faces a trial, the prince is confused since royalty should be exempt from such common legal proceedings. He is relieved to avoid the courtroom, but remains annoyed that the authorities are blowing the situation out of proportion. Turning his attention to Adelia, he confirms that her mana heart has finally stabilized before making a sudden, life-changing decision. He orders Adelia to meet him at the training grounds immediately, declaring that her life as a servant is over. Put down that rag, he commands, making it clear that she must now embrace her new destiny as a knight. As the prince warms up, a senior knight approaches, clearly disapproving of a maid's presence in this sacred training space. He ignores the man's shock, casually explaining that he intends to transform this former servant into a full-fledged warrior. The knight is outraged that the prince treats the title so trivially, but the prince just calls him a busybody. Adelia collapses after finishing 10 grueling laps, her body reaching its limit under the prince's intense and unforgiving gaze. Despite her exhaustion, she apologizes for the conflict, but the prince simply hands her a wooden sword to begin training. He decides to start with the absolute basics, planning to teach her the proper beginner stance for the entire day. With a swift and precise motion, he demonstrates a perfect swing, expecting her to struggle with the complex body mechanics. Adelia takes her stance with trembling hands, nervously asking if she is doing it correctly, before her eyes suddenly sharpen. In a flash of incredible power, she executes the swing with a level of perfection that defies her lack of experience. Both men are left speechless, unable to believe she mastered such a difficult technique after seeing it only once. While Adelia waits for feedback, the prince realizes with a shiver that her talent might soon surpass his own current level. He remembers her slave mentality and worries that if she becomes too strong, she might eventually turn that blade against him. Suddenly, he senses a shift in the atmosphere as the senior knight begins to look at Adelia with genuine, greedy interest. Seeing the knight's expression, the prince steps forward and warns him not to even think about coveting his new student. The knight smiles mockingly, questioning what a novice like the prince could possibly offer a talent as great as hers. "You cannot handle her," the knight declares, believing the prince is still just the weak, pathetic scoundrel he used to be. But the prince knows the truth. He is not the boy they once knew, and his true power remains hidden. He recalls the ancient blood he has tasted as a sword, from the giant king to the legendary mad dragon itself. A heavy, dark energy begins to leak from his soul, reacting to his rising anger and the knight's blatant disrespect. The spectral image of the magic sword Gruhorn manifests, proving his will is far beyond any mortal warrior's comprehension. His eyes glow with a terrifying light as he prepares to show the arrogant knight exactly who he is dealing with. The senior knight freezes in place, overwhelmed by a crushing pressure that makes it feel like his heart might stop. With a voice cold enough to freeze blood, the prince declares that Adelia belongs solely to him and no one else. "Do not look at her," he warns, making it clear that any attempt to take her will result in total destruction. The prince stares him down, stating that he truly hates it when others try to steal what he has claimed. Gruhorn feels the prince's frail body sinking into a cold void as his sense of reality begins to fade away completely. He wonders if this is an omen of his own powerful soul finally devouring the weak physical vessel he now inhabits. At this rate, the legendary magic sword's overwhelming energy will consume the prince, leaving absolutely nothing of his humanity behind. As the darkness takes hold, the prince feels the weight of spectral hands dragging him deeper into the abyss of power. But a sharp voice suddenly commands, "That's enough!" snapping his consciousness back to the surface before it is lost forever. Returning to the training grounds, Gruhorn listens as the commander explains that a single knight can save 10 ordinary soldiers. Count battle-hardened shouts that while an ordinary knight saves 10, an outstanding warrior can save the lives of 100 men. He believes the girl before them has the potential to save thousands, making her the most valuable asset in their army. The prince wonders if this is the count's true conviction, the grim great cause driving the commander of the northern frontier. Despite the count's plea about saving lives, the prince coldly dismisses him, telling Balorhard that he simply does not care. Adelia shocks the count by declaring her absolute loyalty, stating her heart and body already belong to his highness. Gruhorn smirks, knowing his skill forced her submission, then mockingly tells his uncle there is nothing left to teach him. The prince lays down the law, warning the count to stop interfering with his affairs if he wants to remain. Despite the warning, the count returns daily to watch over Adelia as she pushes herself through grueling sword practice. Gruhorn finds it entertaining to watch his uncle squirm, until he notices a powerful glow emanating from Adelia's training weapon. The count is speechless, while Gruhorn realizes with shock that Adelia has already mastered the advanced technique of sword resonance. He cheers for her progress, but privately worries that at this incredible rate, his student might actually surpass her master. Trembling with disbelief, the count demands to know if the prince also dared to teach her the forbidden mana heart. Gruhorn casually admits to it, causing the count to explode in rage, calling the legendary technique a mere cheap trick. The prince's playful mood vanishes instantly, his eyes turning cold as he commands his uncle to get out of his sight. The count is furious, claiming the prince ruined a path of unimaginable potential, before ordering Karl to escort the boy out immediately. Dismissing the help, the prince vows to walk out alone, leaving the female knight questioning if her training was all a lie. The prince reassures her that her skills aren't cheap tricks, but she still wonders why the count is being so dismissive. He explains that the count simply doesn't understand, as people today have forgotten the true nature of a real mana heart. If they knew the truth, they wouldn't discard such power like old shoes. But he promises she will witness its strength soon. To settle the dispute, a training duel is called, with lightning crackling as the prince prepares to show his true worth. The count mocks his return, promising to acknowledge him if he can force the veteran back even a single half-step. Recalling a previous bet about granting a wish, the prince grips his wooden sword, ready to claim his long-awaited prize. Though offered a family secret technique, the prince smirks, declaring he wants something else entirely as his mana begins to flare. With a shout of, "Let's fight!" he lunges forward, aiming straight for the neck and catching the veteran count by surprise. Still as venomous of a sword as ever, the count notes while dodging the prince's lethal strikes. The prince presses the attack with everything he has, but the veteran's defense remains absolutely impenetrable. Their wooden blades clash with thunderous force, neither side willing to yield an inch in this intense duel. The count easily parries the prince's desperate lunge and mockingly asks if this is all he can do. Pushed back into the dirt, the prince struggles to his feet as the count asks if he's surrendered. Scoffing as if, the prince admits his uncle is strong and only waiting to deliver a miserable defeat. He knows that relying on a standard mana heart will lead exactly to the loss his uncle intends. A strange smile creeps onto the prince's face as he asks his uncle if something doesn't feel right. He reminds him that 400 years ago, knights with mana hearts achieved feats that modern men can't imagine. It is pathetic how those legendary arts are now treated like trash, just because one useful technique was discovered. While the world praises the mana chain, the prince declares that his own perspective is entirely different. The count is losing patience, but the prince insists that not every mana heart is built the same way. With a chilling grin, he asks if his uncle has ever heard of the legendary martial spirit hymn. Describing it as ear-tickling nonsense, the count demands they stop talking and get back to crossing swords. The prince mocks him for calling his heart a crude, mercenary technique, but the count just wants him silent. Refusing to catch his breath, the prince's eyes ignite with mana as he prepares to reveal his true strength. He explains that a knight's path becomes their achievement, turning his 100 victories into a tangible source of power. Suddenly, a system message confirms the impossible. The prince has manifested a martial spirit hymn within his sword. This was no accident, as his half-year of constant sparring finally triggers the activation of his secret technique. Blue flames erupt from the wooden blade, finally showing the Count the true, overwhelming power of the mana heart. This is the martial spirit hymn, a power from the past, reborn to reclaim the prince's rightful throne.